It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, my friend and colleague, Dr. Kelly Bremner. Kelly is an associate professor of theater and the chair of the theater department at Emory and Henry College. She is a mother, an activist, a scholar, and an inspiration to many. Please help me welcome Kelly Bremner.
Thanks, Mark. That was nice. I love all of the references to music this morning that you all brought up, whether you knew it or not. That was the topic I was asked to speak on, so thanks for setting me up. So here we go. I've titled this talk, The Music of the Spheres. So Wava asked me to talk about music. She asked me to talk about the ways in which music brings joy to my life and my spiritual connection to it. She said to me, quoting you now, Wava, you didn't know I was going to do that, did you? Yeah, but I am. Many of us are transported to another level when we connect with the music that we love. And she asked to hear my story. She asked me to do this in both word and song. And well, as you all know, if you didn't know before, you certainly do now after Mark said so, I'm a theater maker, and so I hope it's okay if this talk this morning feels as much like a performance as it does like a talk. I can't help myself. It's in my bones. So here I go. The water is wide. I cannot get o'er. And neither have I wings to fly. Give me a boat that can carry two, and both shall row, my love and I have been blessed with the gift of music. But what Wava could not know is that my relationship to this subject is very complex, challenging, deeply personal, and vulnerable. And to stand in front of you and give this talk on this topic in this exact moment of my life, it is not easy for me. I could stand up here and give you a very scholarly response to Wava's ask. I have a BA in music, and I have a PhD minor in music. My doctorate is in theater studies. I have years of professional voice lessons under my belt. I know music theory and music history very well. I love playing Name That Tune when I hear classical music. I'm pretty good at it. I remember a few weeks ago, Bill played a particularly lovely offertory, and someone asked, Bill, what was that? Schubert, I whispered under my breath. Schubert, said Bill. I'm a trained conductor, choirs, not orchestras. I've conducted choirs at St. John the Divine in New York City, among other places. I've directed a lot of opera, which is something I don't really do much anymore. I've developed a number of new operas. I've directed and coached singers on the Metropolitan Opera roster. I've been blessed enough to be asked to teach acting at the Chicago Lyric Opera. And I remember so vividly, for you music fans out there, the room that I worked in with the singers was storing costumes for the upcoming production of De Rosenkavalier. And Joyce DiDonato's dress was like right there in the room with me. And I was the teacher that was asked to come in right after Renee Fleming, right? Humbling. And I offer these credentials not to sound egotistical, but just to reveal something that many folks around here don't know about me. And the why of the why you don't know it is actually why I want to talk about this subject this morning. I believe in the power of story, and while in some ways I'm an expert in music, in many other ways there are countless other folks who could come and speak to you this morning with far more authority on this subject. What I do know is that my personal story and relationship to it, I hope by sharing it, I hope I can share with you something that resonates about music and brings some light to maybe this most mysterious of subjects. His head was bent in sorrow, green scales felt like rain. Puff no longer went to play along the cherry lane. Without his lifelong friend, Puff could not be brave. So Puff, that mighty dragon, sadly slipped into his cave. The music of the spheres, as I have titled this talk, is an ancient philosophical concept, also called musica universalis, or the music or the harmony of the spheres. The idea is that the movement of celestial bodies, like the sun and the moon and the stars, have a direct relationship to music. The idea is that it's about the ideal proportions. This music of the spheres is not literally audible, but it speaks to a mysterious and inexplicable tie between science, music, and religion, or mystery. Plato described astronomy and music as twinned sensual experiences. Astronomy is for the eye, he said, and music is for the ear. Both dependent on mathematics, and I would add, both dependent to a great extent, that is, on mystery. This idea of music of the spheres in Western thought goes at least all the way back to the ancient Greece and was written about by Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, countless others. The idea was so very important that it shows up regularly through the Renaissance, all over the plays of Shakespeare, for example, and other art forms as well. I learned of this concept first as an undergraduate in a theater literature course, and I find myself fascinated by it to this day. Of course, then, my first musical experiences were at a church. I was raised in a beautiful old New England church as a Congregationalist, but this was not your normal UCC church. There were third eye healings going on in the basement before services, and many of the women dabbled in earth-based religions, leaving the church in my early 20s to begin a coven. But oh, the music. The choir in the church was unbelievable, all volunteer. We had a men's section that had a full professional barbershop quintet anchoring it. The women were serious college musicians, and as these folks started to have families, our choir conductor, Janet Paoletti, decided that all of us would gather the kids together and that we would start to perform as well. I remember so vividly, so many of these folks, if you don't know my story, I come from very simple beginnings. I'm a blue-collar kid, and everyone came in their farm clothes, and if you wore your farm clothes to church, you were absolutely in the choir, because then you didn't have to change, right? Toss that robe on, and you were good to go. If you look carefully, you could see the boots and the dickies walking down the center of the aisle, but it didn't matter. I love that. In this church, we had a yearly variety show, which was very popular due to the level of talent in that church. Homespun. There was a sheet at the front that had Sharpied letterings on it that said, "Welcome to the show," with backwards music notes, something that bothered me once I had enough education to know the music notes were all backwards. Didn't matter. That sheet was hung over the cross at the front of the sanctuary, and there was singing, dancing, comedy routines, all by members of the congregation, and it was the major fundraiser of our church. One year, when I was 7 years old, Janet decided we kids would sing Puff the Magic Dragon. And verses would be handed out as solos, and I got the sad verse, the one I just shared with you, the sad one. And I must have been a heartbreaker, I tell you, because from there, the gigs started pouring in. Church solos, yes, but I was asked to sing as a child at countless occasions. Fairs, weddings, other churches. I was actually earning a paycheck as a singer when I was really quite young, put into my college fund. My parents were very responsible. My whole childhood was full of these gigs, and I sang and sang and sang my way happily through my childhood. My closest childhood friends said to me in my teenage years that my identity was tied up into two things: my hair and my voice. My identity literally came tied up in with my ability to sing. But something about this, I'm going to say to you now, always sat funny with me. Something about it never quite felt right. And by the time I was to head off to college, everyone was sure I would go and study music and become a singer. Ironically, I went to the only college that did not offer me a music scholarship. And I went off, I thought, to become an English teacher. I'll share with you now one of my favorite E.E. Cummings poems. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May went down to the beach to play one day, and Maggie discovered a shell that sang so sweetly She couldn't remember her troubles. And Millie befriended a stranded star whose rays 5 languid fingers were, and Molly was chased by a horrible thing which raced sideways while blowing bubbles. And May came home with a smooth round stone, as small as a world and as large as a loan. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find at the sea. I was actually thrown out of my first college voice lesson. True story. Meredith Hudson took me into her studio saying I had curious eyes. Meredith Hudson was a bit eccentric. At our first lesson, I vocalized a bit and she asked me to share a piece. 18-year-old me shared Far From the Home I Love from Fiddler on the Roof. As soon as I was done, she told me to get out. I was terrified. I was a girl from blue-collar America, daughter of blue-collar parents at a very nice, prestigious liberal arts school with no one else who was quite like me. And I assumed that I had messed something up. I was so ashamed. I was mortified, and I gathered my things to bolt out the door, and then she stood up, and she was crying. She stopped me, and she said I sang with a vulnerability that was rare. And while she would not train it out of me, she would help me rein it in. And Maggie discovered a shell that sang so sweetly, she couldn't remember her troubles. Let's talk music theory for a second. Cadences. Cadences are the ends of musical phrases. It's how we know a phrase or a piece has come to an end. Thinking about the hymn that Bill played for us this morning, right? There's clear cadence at the end. It's how we know the song is over. So, do 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 do. Here's the cadence. Do 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 do. Right? You know the song is over when you hear that. You would never think a song is over like do 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 do. Feels wrong, right? Feels wrong. I know. There's people back there freaking out, right? It's because they skipped the cadence, right? That's how ingrained that idea of musical endings is in our Western ears. It's not the same if you visit other cultures and musical traditions are based on different scales. But cadences for us are what I've just described. It's how you know, in the middle of a hymn, hymns are great to hear cadences. In the middle of a hymn, there's a series of cadences at the end of every phrase. And then at the end of the piece, we have the strongest cadence, so you know it's the end of the song, right? A fun fact that I find intriguing is these cadences all have names. And while I could really geek out with some music theory, get out the board, really tell you what's going on a theory level. Lots of numbers would get involved, fractions. Music theoreticians, which are pretty, scientific people, they give those cadences all names. And those names are things that talk about how they make us feel. Right? So, for example, I was raised in a congregational church, as I said, and at the end of every hymn, we sang the Amen. Maybe you've been to churches that do this. So it would be like, do 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 do. Amen. Right? It's a different sound, right? It's not the cadence you just heard. It's actually a different cadence. You really know the song's over then. That's called a plagal cadence. A plagal cadence, a 4-1, for those of you who know music theory. And as far as I can tell, the etymology of plagal goes back to Latin referring to the church. It's the church cadence. Here's some other interesting words we use to describe cadences, though. The authentic cadence. The authentic cadence is the one we use the most often to end a piece of music. Think about that for a second. We call that the authentic cadence. It's how we know we're at the end of a piece of music. One source I consulted in preparation for this talk said this cadence is virtually obligatory to end a tonal piece. Authentic. Authenticism is virtually obligatory to end a piece. That's the cadence that's the end of the hymn that we heard this morning. It's a strong 5-1 cadence. It's authentic. But they come in all sorts of other words too. Authentic. Perfect. They're perfect cadences. Imperfect cadences. Evaded cadences, deceptive cadences. These are all names of all the cadences. Listen to the poetry in that. Cadences are about the ends of things, the ends of phrases, the ends of songs. And theoreticians don't choose to label them with the mathematics attributed to those sounds, but with their emotional qualities. And now, I start to hear music moving from something that is deeply ancient to something that is deeply personal. I lean my back up against an oak. I thought it was a trusty tree, but first it swayed, and then it broke, and so my love did unto me. The Water is Wise, the first duet I ever sang with my father, gigged out at churches to sing that a number of times. A lot of beautiful settings of that piece. I'm sure many of you know that song. But let this talk get real personal for a second, and I'm going to skip along real quickly because I'm a New Englander and I don't like to talk about my feelings, but I can't talk about the subject of music without going here authentically for at least a moment. Many of you here know that I am recently divorced and that my ex-husband and the father of my children is a professional musician, like a serious one, like a well-known one. And if I'm really being honest, I think music formed a great part of our story. I spent significant parts of my life at concerts or in concerts associated with his music. I've always been a serious singer. Even straight through grad school, I sang in a very prestigious choir, which is virtually unheard of, by the way, for a theater maker, because we are way too busy to do things like sing in choirs. Here in Emory, though, not so much. And I miss it. Oh, how I miss it. But somehow, something in my personal life got all tangled up in the world of serious classical music, which never quite has fit for me. And then I ended up at this moment, where music, especially that music, can be fraught for me personally. I bust out my voice at events at the college. That's pretty frequent for me, mostly to make people laugh, especially Shelley Coe over there. I like to sing the alma mater at the top of my lungs at commencements because it's a difficult alma mater and no one can sing it. So I do my part, and I don't do it for beauty. I do it mostly to make Shelley laugh. Usually it works. Otherwise, though, I've largely turned away from, real singing. And think about that for a second. I told you a moment ago that as a child, my identity was literally tied into my voice. She said if I cut my hair, she thought I would lose my identity, and I did that. For most of my life, I had hair down to my waist. Many of you probably can't picture that at this point. My first couple years in Emory, when Shelley met me, hair down to my waist, but now I'm rocking something different. And I don't feel like I lost myself when I gave up my hair. I didn't feel like I did. But I wonder for a second if, when I gave up the music, when I stopped making music, if I did lose a little bit, maybe, of who I am. For my close friend, my music was my identity. And I wonder if there's something about my most recent chapter of life that really did take something from my sense of self, though I'm well on the mend. And while to reduce this adjustment to music would be simplistic, think about this for a second. Authenticity, perfection, imperfection, deception. Music is my identity. And so here I am in front of you trying to make sense of what Ava asked me to do. Talk about music and my personal relationship to it. In a very real way, I stumbled into this church about 2 years ago at the invitation of the Finneys, pretty darn broken, pretty overwhelmed by life and hoping to get my girls a spiritual community. And I came here seeking what? Community, kindness, relief, a joint sense of purpose. But I desperately tried to hide this part of me that is so intrinsically tied to music. And why did I do that? I mean, I consciously tried to hide it from you all, right? I'm going to admit that right now. I did that. Shame, embarrassment, mourning. You all found me out. I can't help myself. The hymns take hold of me, and the pleasures of weekly singing, I can't describe to you how much joy there is in that to me. I remember Harry coming to my row one day and asking, all right, who is it? Somebody up here can really sing. And Mark outed me. Yeah. 'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis gift to come down where you ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. And as I'm in need to bring this conversation to a close, and while I feel so keenly I am just scratching the surface of this incredibly complex topic, here I am. Wava asked, what is it about music? And I'm here to tell you, through writing this speech, I have discovered I have some real feelings about this that are deeply embedded in my personal story. Music is ancient. Like the music of the spheres, which captures a blend of science and mystery. And music is all that for me, and I think it is for many of you as well. Let me tell you, though, where I am, by way of a temporary conclusion, perhaps, maybe an imperfect cadence. Even more important than knowing the names of all those cadences, and the Met roster, and knowing one Puccini aria from another, and advanced degrees in theory and musicology and so on. And while my music career is not definitive or frankly significant, I can tell you right now what I truly believe is significant for this blue-collar girl from rural America. I went to a summer camp from the ages of 5 to 21. Most of you, or many of you, still know I go to a summer camp to this day, and I'll tell you right now, without hesitation, that my most significant musical experiences of my life are in that setting, not the others. Leading songs back in New Hampshire late into the night, singing silly songs with the kiddos I work with in Seattle, and even scout campfires that some of you in this room have joined me for, those really mean something to me. More importantly to me than perhaps even my PhD research, I have somehow been unofficially crowned the songkeeper of my childhood summer camp. I get emails regularly from campers from years, decades before I attended this camp, or current staff that were not even born when I went there. They call me, they email me to check lyrics or a tune. And that really means something to me. To me, there is no greater tragedy than an individual who's been taught they can't sing. Or worse yet, this is the one that really gets me, shouldn't. That's because right now my conclusion about the power of music has nothing to do with the beauty of a voice or the arc of a phrase or when a piece was written or even why. Music is about humanity. Music is about my humanity and my identity. Music is about mystery coming from something deeper than ourselves. Music is escape. Music is release. Through the writing of this piece, I've come to see these important things. Music is deeply personal, right? I mean, we all have a lot of feelings tied up on this subject. What we like, what we don't, whether or not we can sing or play or should. In this same deeply personal way, I've learned if we're not careful, music can pick up hues of shame. Music can pick up hues of inadequacy. It can be tied up with whether or not we understand something we hear, or whether or not we feel like it's okay to admit songs that we like or songs that we don't, for fear that someone might judge us for that. Music is tied up with memories, good and bad. And for all of these reasons, I will say to you without hesitation, at this moment in my life, music is about community. The fact that you all let me step to the front of this room and lead you in song, but most importantly, join you in song, I can tell you that I have been in some of the great concert halls of the world, and I still prefer this sound to that one. And that you entrust that to me, that really means something. Thank you.